Today we are torture testing the four-wheel drive systems on all 6 new mid-size trucks: Nissan Frontier, the all-new Ford Ranger, the all-new Toyota Tacoma, the Chevy Colorado, the Honda Ridgeline, and the Jeep Gladiator to find out which vehicle has the best four-wheel drive system. We're going to run them through the TFL slip test, then put them on the lift, and lastly take them out into some dirt to see how they perform.
But it took a lot of throttle pace.
This is the TFL slip test. In this test, we get various wheels stuck on purpose in these rollers to see how the traction control system, locking differentials, and four-wheel drive system perform to get us unstuck. The first test is a diagonal slip test, so opposite ends of the vehicle are stuck in the rollers. The other 2 ends are going to have to start spinning to get us unstuck. So the left front and the right rear are stuck. Then the other 2 wheels are going to have to start spinning if we're going to drive off. Now, up first is the new Chevy Colorado. This one is a Trail Boss configuration. We have a G80 automatic locking rear differential, and then this vehicle has a part-time four-wheel drive system with an automatic function. So for this first test, we're going to run all the vehicles in four-wheel drive high. Not going to engage any special modes, just like you would drive it every day through slush, snow, ice. Off the brake, onto the throttle. You try to be nice and gentle, like you're getting unstuck out of a snowbank. We got some action from the four-wheel drive system and that G80 locking rear diff, and we got off. On to the next test. Right now for the first of the extreme test, only one wheel on the ground, in this case the left rear. One advantage of the Chevy Silverado Trail Boss is the rear locker is automatic, fully mechanical, and it works in both high and low range. The disadvantage is you can't electronically turn it on and off. All right, let's see if we can get unstuck. Same technique. Gentle throttle application. There you go. You could feel the lurch as that G80 engaged, and we drove off. This final test is the hardest. It's the 3-wheel slip test with 1 front wheel on the ground. Only the left front is in contact with the pavement. Now, the Colorado is available with the front locker in the ZR2 configuration. We do not have the ZR2 configuration for our test today. It's also worth noting that this vehicle's sibling, the Canyon, is going to perform very similarly because mechanically they're very much the same. So traction control is going to have to engage on that front diff if we're going to get unstuck. Still driving the vehicle in normal mode, so we can keep it as apples to apples with the other testers, but if we need, we can try both low range or a different drive mode. Okay, it took a lot of spinning, but eventually we clawed our way off. Now we've gone into low range on the Colorado and selected the terrain mode. And we're going to see if that has a performance difference. Off the brake, onto the throttle. Well, it allowed a lot more revving, and ultimately we did get off easier, a lot less traction control intervention, but we were able to successfully make it off in low range as well. Time for the next truck. This is the brand new Toyota Tacoma, the 4th generation. This one is the TRD off-road configuration, diagonal slip test, 4-wheel drive high, no special modes. In 3, 2, 1, foot off the brake, onto the accelerator. Very good result, extremely good. Just a little bit of slip, and off we drove. Now for the first 3-wheeled slip test, only the left rear is on the ground. And let's give it a go. Trying to lock our rear diff, but unfortunately we can't do it except in low range. So we're gonna try this test first in high range, and then we can try low range with the rear locker. All right, off the brake in 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, so we got some slip, some pretty major spin. Ultimately, we did get that torque transfer and we were able to get off, but let's try it one more time in low range with the rear locker engaged and see how that performs. All right, here we go. Low range, locker is engaged in 3, 2, 1. Yep, drove right off because we had those 2 rear wheels locked at the same speed. On to the next test. This Tacoma does seem to throw quite the fight going between low and high range. Come on. Neutral. Give it a little bit of reverse. Neutral. Just blinks at me. Just work. I have the hardest time across the vast majority of Toyota products going between low and high range so often. Okay, I'm trying to unwind the rear locker, bringing it forward and backward. Okay, the rear locker finally has disengaged. Now we just need to get the transfer case out of low range. There we go, finally we can continue with our testing. Wow, what a pain. Final test, front wheel slip test. The left front is on the ground in standard 4-wheel drive high. Let's see if we can get unstuck. Ho-ho, Toyota with the traction control programming. Excellent, excellent result. Hardly any slippage. And even in 4 high, we got that torque transfer immediately. We're gonna try 4 low with some special modes now. All right, shifting into 4 low. There we go, 4 low, and then we're gonna go to multi-terrain select. We're going to go into the rock programming, just like that. And then we can also engage the crawl control. Just like that. I'm gonna go to the middle setting of crawl control. I'm gonna let my foot off the brake, and we're gonna see if the vehicle can get itself unstuck. Off the brake, crawl control active. It's like we were on dry pavement. Really impressive result on that test. Time for the Frontier. First test starting in 4-wheel drive high, settled into the rollers, diagonal slip test in a drive. A little bit of throttle, a little bit of slipping, but ultimately the truck was able to pull itself off. On to the next one. Now for the Nissan Frontier with 1 rear wheel on the ground. This hardbody edition does not have the rear locker, although it is available in the Pro 4X. Into neutral, vehicle settled into drive, 4 high. Come on, torque transfer. Oh, a little bit stuck. Let's try low range. Maybe that's going to give us a different traction control programming. Really good activation into low range in the Nissan. That's the key. If you want to get unstuck in a Nissan, go into low range and it turns into a whole new truck. Starting out the final test in 4 high, nice and settled. Oh, it did it. Pretty decent actually. We'll try it one more time in low range just to compare. All right, final test with the Frontier. We got into low range, a little bit of right input so we don't slip off. Oh, good result. You want to really get unstuck, seriously, in the Frontier, put it in low range. It transforms the truck. All right, now for the Honda Ridgeline, arguably the underdog of this configuration, recently updated, and I happen to know that the iVTM4 system in this Ridgeline, a full-time all-wheel drive system, is actually pretty impressive. So let's see how it works on the slip test. Into drive, normal mode, no special modes. This is diagonal. Tiny bit of slipping, and the Ridgeline drove off. Really no drama to speak of. Left rear wheel on the ground. Let's see if the Honda can figure out what to do with a torque vectoring rear differential in the Ridgeline here. Neutral, settled. Starting out in normal mode. Onto the accelerator. A little bit of slip, actually. Yeah. We did a little bit of a burnout. We got enough torque transfer to that rear where it actually started to engage and burn out and pulled us off. So pretty impressive. You know, I know this truck takes some heat from old school truck guys, but the Ridgeline is a surprisingly good all-wheel drive system. I'm always amazed whenever I drive these as to what they can do. No low range, really no locking diff either. It's just all computers and some special torque vectoring equipment. Okay, this is the final test. Still in the normal mode. Honda! Pretty damn impressive! One more mode in the Ridgeline. This is the mud mode. There is also a sand and a snow, but I find that mud seems to be the most effective in this kind of situation. So mud mode engaged. Onto the throttle. I mean, it's just amazing. I'm not being paid by Honda, by the way. I'm not being paid by anyone. I'm being paid a little bit by Roman, but none of the companies are paying us to say anything, but the Honda all-wheel drive system is very sophisticated. All right, time for the Ford Ranger. into four-wheel drive, high, diagonal slip test, no special modes, into neutral, letting the vehicle settle. Then we're gonna go ahead into drive. Let's see what happens on the diagonal test. Yeah, pretty good. A little bit of slip, but ultimately we pulled ourselves down. On to the next one. All right, three-wheel slip test, left rear on the ground, and this is the FX4 package. So we do have a rear locker, which we can engage if we need it, but we're gonna try it first without the rear locker. Oh. Not having it. But one thing which is good about the Ford is you can engage the rear locker in high range. You don't have to go into low range like the Toyota. One thing which I don't like is you have to go into the screen to engage the rear locker. What happens if your screen has an issue, dies, glitches, whatever? You can't engage your rear locker, but it's on now. Worked like a charm. So that part is good. All right, starting out in high range for the final test. Only the left front on the ground. Okay, quite a bit of spinning, but very little torque transfer. We can try going into 4 low. Maybe that'll engage a different four-wheel drive traction program. Advanced track off in 4 low. Okay, there we go, there we go. All right, now we're gonna try one more thing. One thing which is odd is we have a bunch of different drive modes in this Ranger. But if I wanna go into, clear the seatbelt warning. If I want to go into the sand mode or the mud and ruts, it's going to try to kick me out of low range. So let's go back into high range. We'll try mud and ruts for high. Okay, good. And then we're going to use trail control, which I would love to use in 4 low, but it won't let me do it unless I'm in high range if I want to use this mud and rut program. It kind of a little confusing. In the neutral, let the vehicle settle. Gonna set the trail control to 2 miles an hour in high range, remember, because we wanted that mud and rut program. Okay, come on. See if you can figure it out. This is worse than doing it with my foot. And we don't have as much control in low range. So this is all the truck is trying to figure out what to do. Okay, that's not having it. What if we go out of mud and ruts into the sand? Oh, okay, that was good. So I had to change the mode there. I don't think trail control is as finely tuned as crawl control. It just works a little better than the Toyota.
Now for the Jeep Gladiator, and to get this truck into the mix, we had to do it on a different day. So I am sitting in for Tommy, but we're going to do the test the exact same way as always. So I'm backing onto the rollers. All right, going into neutral, letting the truck settle. And I'm also going to go into my 4 auto setting. So this truck actually does have a full-time 4-wheel drive setting for the transfer case, which is pretty cool. That's an option on these now. And I do have a locking rear diff, but for this test, I'm just in the 4 auto, so high range. I'm not gonna lock the rear diff. I'll just drive it as you would drive it normally if you were in snowy, slippery conditions, and it takes nothing for the truck to pull off. Really easy. Now onto the first of our 3-wheel slip tests. So backing onto the rollers once again. Once again, into neutral, settling it. And I'm still in 4 auto, so no special modes. And let's see if the Jeep can get itself unstuck. Yeah, easy, just a little bit of slipping, but not much. But let's do that test one more time, and I'm going to kick on the rear locker. Should be even easier. Now, this being a Gladiator Mojave, it does only have the rear locker. It doesn't have a front locker like the Rubicon. And I've kicked it on. It says axle lock canceled. Try that one more time. Oh, it wants me to be in 4 low. So I'll go ahead and go into 4 low, mid neutral. Now I should be able to kick the rear locker on, and we're there. So back onto the rollers, into neutral. All right. And unsurprisingly, absolutely nothing, because we have a rear tire on the ground, plenty of traction, super easy. Now for the hardest test of them all, we're doing one front tire on the ground. For this test, with just one front tire on the ground, I'm back in a 4 high, no special modes. Let's see if the Jeep can figure it out. Oh, yeah. You feel that brake engagement sending torque over to the tire that has traction. It works really quickly. Very good result. Now let's do that last slip test one more time, but now I'm in 4 low. I'm in the off-road plus mode. So I should have the maximum amount of off-road goodies and assistance here. I barely get to the throttle and it's already off the rollers, so really impressive system here in the Gladiator. Underneath the Chevy Colorado, we can see how this truck is constructed. So up in the front, we've got independent front suspension with a coilover suspension design. We've got an open front differential, the only model of Chevy Colorado or GMC Canyon that you're gonna see with a locking front differential would be either the ZR2 or like an AT4X, right, Tommy?
That's right, yep, in the GMC. And then this has a fixed sway bar with no optional disconnect.
Yeah, that's right. And now, pretty beefy frame under this truck. We measured it, and the height of these frame rails at this middle point is about 7 inches and about 3 inches wide. So pretty beefy setup. And then this transfer case here. This is a part-time 4-wheel drive system, but it does have a 4-auto setting, which is nice.
Yeah, and then moving back, we're gonna find a solid rear axle, and this Trail Boss trim does have a locking rear differential,
which is always good to have. And then we've got inboard shocks, so on the inside of the frame rails here, and leaf springs in the rear. In the front of the Colorado, we do also have a small skid plate, but over the fuel tank, there is nothing on this particular trim, although you can get a skid plate on the fuel tank on the ZR2.
All right, Case, so we are going to run all these trucks through our newly revamped trenches course, Extreme Trenches.
Yeah, this is the best part of the video, and we kind of earned it because you and I spent some time earlier today digging out the trenches to make them even harder for these trucks.
Exactly, so we saw a control environment on how these 4-wheel drive systems work, and now we can put them out in the real world and see how it works in dirt. And up first is Andre's Trail Boss. Now we do have that G80 locking rear diff, and we're gonna run the same procedure for all the trucks. So first we're gonna go up trenches, which are these big cuts in the earth, in low range, no modes, no special things engaged. Yeah. And then we're gonna run it again with all the bells and whistles.
What's awesome about this test is we get a good idea of clearance, which on this particular truck is about 9.5 inches.
According to Chevy, yep.
And we get a good test of what the traction control and differential setup can do, and we get to see in real time the articulation. It's kind of a test of everything.
So this has an automatic locker, and you could see it took a second there for it to engage. Once it engages, it works pretty well.
Yeah, you just got to stay in the throttle, and eventually that rear locker will kick in.
So starting to accelerate, right?
Yep.
There goes that locker.
And once it goes, you start moving.
It's not super smooth. Our goal here is not to take these fast, it's to take it slow on purpose to upset the truck.
Whoa, kicking up dirt.
We did it. So that G80 is often criticized, Case, but it really works very well when it's engaged, and it works in both low and high range. It's a fully mechanical system. You don't need to push any buttons, turn any knobs, so it's got both its pros and its cons.
Generally, I would pick a selectable locker over that, but this is an economical setup, and having it versus not having anything at all, just having an open rear diff, I'd much rather have the G80.
All right, we're going down our logs course here. How would you rate the ride quality with these leaf springs?
You know, this is never smooth. I don't care what vehicle you're doing it in, but these cheapo shocks are definitely not the best in the industry.
I would agree. These tires, by the way, Goodyear Wranglers. It's really a good all-terrain tire, and we are running all the trucks at the recommended pressure just to keep it fair.
You can also, for the record, get these trucks with DSSV spool valve shocks, which are some of the best best shocks that you can get on any midsize truck. This, of course, is a pretty base level trail boss, so it doesn't have that.
So Andre's truck doesn't have too many modes or buttons to play with, but we're going to stick it into the terrain mode and try the same course one more time. Low range terrain mode, and let's see how this vehicle does. Articulation feels really good, and this 2.7 liter inline 4-cylinder engine makes 310 horsepower.
430 pound-feet of torque too.
Yeah, so it's by far the torquiest of our group today.
Yeah, it's a beast in that category, and we've got about a 32.6 inch diameter tire.
Yeah, come on baby.
And a pretty aggressive tire too.
That G80 is not smooth, but it is effective.
No, it does what you need it to do though.
All right, on to the next truck.
Underneath the Tacoma independent double wishbone front suspension, a coilover design, we do have a skid plate here underneath, although this feels like plastic. And then, tell me about the sway bars, Tommy.
Well, this one has the fixed sway bar, but there is an option for a disconnectable version as well. And what about the four-wheel drive system, Case?
Here's the transfer case, and this is a part-time system. It is possible to get a full-time four-wheel drive system, but it's optional and only on the limited trim. So you're gonna have to go for that luxury spec if that's something that you want. And then we do have a little bit of a skid plate here underneath the fuel tank as well.
And what about the frame height and width?
It's about 7 inches in its height and about 3.5 inches in its width, so a pretty beefy frame. And then coming back here to the rear, we've got a solid axle on coil springs. We have these trailing arms here, and the shocks are mounted outboard.
Yep, and there is an option on the base model to get leaf springs in rear suspension, and this one has the electronic rear locker, but no front locking option.
Case, we're out here at the Onyx Off-Road Andre's Pit Course. Onyx Off-Road, our go-to #1 off-road navigation software. Find the coolest trails in your area and know exactly what you're getting into. Plus, it integrates into Apple CarPlay.
Yeah, and you can download offline maps, so even if you don't have service, you know where you are. Now let's see how the suspension on the Tacoma feels.
A little smoother.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, that's quite good.
This is, of course, coil sprung versus the leaf springs that are in at least the rear of the Colorado. And what, Bilstein shocks?
You got it, Case, in this TRD Off-Road. So we're gonna run the same exact course, and we're gonna start out in 4 low, no special modes, no locker. We're gonna let the truck figure out what to do. And this particular TRD Off-Road does not have the disconnectable sway bar, it's worth noting.
It doesn't, so it'll be interesting to see how well it articulates. But we do have about 11 inches of ground clearance according to Toyota, which is pretty good.
But a slightly smaller tire, the diameter coming in at 31.6.
Yeah.
And actually, the Toyota 4-wheel drive and traction control programming, even in standard low range, I mean, look at that. That works really, really well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I'm not really noticing a lot of hesitation going up here. We're just continuously progressing forward.
Yep, and I'm taking it super easy to make it as hard as possible.
That's a really solid performance from the traction control right there.
Man, Toyota does know how to develop a traction control program. It really is impressive what they do. Even on a non-TRD Pro truck, it works super well.
And that was also in our more mild setting. So let's see what it does now with crawl control and the rear locker.
Yeah, we're gonna dial everything up, Case. Now, horsepower in this truck, 278 in torque.
317 pound-feet of torque, and that torque number comes in really low in the rev range, so it's actually a pretty pushy powertrain.
Yeah, and that powertrain does sound a little bit like a diesel at lower RPMs. Direct injected 2.4 is not a fantastic sounding engine.
No, that's not the high point.
But it is effective.
And it's a huge improvement over the powertrain in the previous generation Tacoma.
All right, so for this one, we're gonna engage everything we got. So we're gonna go into multi-terrain select. We're gonna go to the rock program. Like that, then we're going to go DAC crawl into the middle setting, into drive.
Rear locker.
Rear locker.
Yep.
There's a lot of stuff you can turn on this
Yeah,
Tacoma.
there really is.
We'll see how the rear locker engagement is too. It's still flashing at me. There we go. We're
Not
locked
too
up.
bad.
All right, so foot off the accelerator.
Yeah,
This
let
is
the truck do its thing.
all the Tacoma. Yeah, so far so good. We're gonna get to our first trench transition here. Articulation feels pretty good too.
Yeah, it does. Not bad. This is definitely what we're driving into, the harder part.
Yeah, because it gets pretty steep. Dragged a step a little there, but nothing too crazy.
No. This is a really good performance.
Yeah, really good. And that is no input for me at all. That is all the Tacoma doing its thing.
Just steering and let the truck figure it out.
All right.
And it definitely figured it out.
It definitely did. So really solid work from the Toyota overall. My only big complaint with this truck is getting it in and out of the rear locker engagement, and getting in and out of low range is a chore.
It is. Here in the Nissan Frontier, we have independent double wishbone front suspension, coil-over design. We do have a little bit of a skid plate here in the front, but tell me about the diff and the sway bar, Tommy.
Yep, fixed sway bar, no front locker available on the Frontier. And what about full-time four-wheel drive case?
Also not an option. Here's our transfer case, and it's just a part-time system. And then coming around to the back, solid rear axle. We've got leaf springs, and our shocks are mounted inside of the frame rails. Also no skid here.
Yep, and this one does not have the rear locker, but it is an option on the Pro 4X version of the Frontier.
It is worth mentioning that we also do have a bit of a rock slider here as part of this trim package. However, if you look, you can see that it's not tied into the frame. It's tied into the body. That being said, I'd still rather have it than not have anything at all.
All right, Case, the Nissan Frontier Hard Body Edition. We're gonna check out the ride quality down our logs course.
Let's find out if it can ride as good as it looks.
Pretty good.
Maybe not quite as good as a Toyota.
It's a little firmer, but I'd say better than the Chevy.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty good ride quality. And the tire diameter, 31.6, right, Case?
8.6 inches of ground clearance in the front and 9 in the rear. Kind of weird to have two numbers. Realistically, you know, your low point's your low point, so we'll call it 8.6.
Yep, and then these are Hankook all-terrain tires. Now, we already mentioned this on the lift, but this particular trim, this hard body version does not have the rear locker. So we're just gonna have to go with low range, and I don't even think we have any off-road modes in this vehicle. Case we have a downhill assist, but apart from that, it's old school.
It's pretty Spartan, especially considering that it's the same price as most of the trucks here.
Yep, we do have this wonderful 3.8 V6, which I think is very smooth. It's not the quickest engine.
No, even though 310 horsepower, so tied for the most amount of horsepower with any of the trucks here, but 281 pound-feet of torque, so not a ton of torque.
So we're going over our obstacles. Actually, Case, it is doing significantly better than I expected.
Especially for, not having, obviously, a rear locker. The traction control system is doing a decent job, still getting some hesitation, but it figures it out.
Okay, yeah. Just a little bit of accelerator. Check that out. Look, if you want to come do that kind of stuff regularly, the Pro 4X with the rear locker, it's probably going to be a better choice.
For sure.
But for being just an open diff, I'd say it performed well.
And since we don't really have any other modes, I guess that's the only run for us to do.
That's all we have to do.
Nothing else to switch on.
You got it.
Underneath the Ridgeline, this is going to be the biggest departure from all of the other trucks that we've been testing, right, Tommy?
Yeah, that's right. So first of all, Case, what is the frame height and width?
Well, it's kind of hard to measure because this is a unibody construction. There is a subframe, but not really anything that we can throw the tape measure on.
That's right. Now up front, Case, we have a McPherson strut front suspension. And what about skid plates?
Well, we kind of have a little bit of a skid plate right there underneath the oil pan, but otherwise not a whole lot.
You're also going to notice, Case, no traditional transfer case in this vehicle because it is a full-time all-wheel drive with no low range, and the rear suspension is also funky.
Yeah, so we've got an independent rear suspension. It's the only one here with an independent rear, also coil sprung, and here is our rear differential, part of that really cool IVTM4 all-wheel drive system. Is really good.
Yeah, torque vectoring, but Case, not a lot of skid plates under here. We have an air deflector and some skid bars around the fuel tank, but no hardcore bash plate.
All right, Case, now for kind of the wild card here. This is the updated Honda Ridgeline Trail Sport version.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, this is fighting an uphill battle when it comes to off-road testing because we've got 7.6 inches of ground clearance, it's the least ground clearance, and we've got a 29.6 inch tire, general grabber, so not a bad tire, but also the smallest tire.
Ride quality is actually very good though. I'd say for considering it has the smallest tire, it's pretty comfortable. Maybe not as comfortable as the Toyota, but it's okay.
Yeah, and we're also going kind of slow over the logs. But the high point of the Ridgeline has always been the way it drives on road. It's very car-like and very comfortable, and we're not going to see that right here, but it's a huge advantage in this.
So, full-time all-wheel drive system, no low range in this vehicle, but it does have a trick up its sleeve. This Honda iVTM4 system has proven itself to be very capable.
Yep.
And we're gonna see how it does. So first we're gonna go up in normal mode. We're not gonna engage any of the dirt modes, and we're gonna see how it performs. 3.5 naturally aspirated V6, right? Ooh, a little bit of plowing in the front there.
Yeah, we've got limited ground clearance here, so it's going to be interesting to see how we do. We might scrape a little bit.
We might bottom it out a little, so we're going to take it easy.
And it's what, 280 horsepower, 262 pound-feet of torque?
Yep.
But
9-speed automatic. Pretty good gearing in the first gear though, for what it is.
And this iVTM4 all-wheel drive system is always impressive. It's basically the same system that you get in the Pilot Trail Sport, and in that car it's also really impressive.
Full throttle, come on.
Oh, there we go, it figures it out.
Come on, full throttle, let's do it, Honda.
Ooh, all right,
we did it, but it took a lot of throttle, Case.
Certainly not the easiest. Struggled.
Look, this is a great truck for snow. And we've driven these extensively in winter conditions, and the Ridgeline is shockingly capable in snowy conditions.
Well, and the other thing too that we've talked about in this video, and that doesn't necessarily get talked about all the time, but having a full-time four-wheel drive system like what's in this Ridgeline is really a huge advantage, because if you've got a part-time system that's only going to do a 50-50 split between front and rear, you're gonna wanna switch back and forth between having that on whenever you get into some slick conditions, and it's just another thing to have to think about. And it's a little bit of a pain. It's not the end of the world, but it's really nice having a full-time system.
Yeah, I'm on the money with that, and it's cool that some of the other trucks offer it in a bunch of different trims. It's Toyota's biggest weakness is that they only offer it in the Limited. Yeah. And I know a lot of Tacoma owners wish you could get it in a TRD off-road or an SR5 or something. All right, so now we're gonna go into, what do you think? We got normal, snow, mud, and sand. You thinking mud mode?
Yeah, let's do mud.
Let's do mud. I think that's a good bet.
Closest to what we're driving over.
Yep, I'm gonna lock it into first gear. Mud mode, stability reduced. Definitely have the most limited ground clearance.
Yeah, for sure.
I would also argue probably the worst articulation when you say, Case.
Yeah, and part of this being a car-like vehicle and how it drives is that it's a pretty stiff vehicle, so it just doesn't feel like the thing flexes as well as some of the more traditional body-on-frame trucks that we have here.
It is doing better in mud mode though.
Yeah, it seems to be hesitating less.
A lot less.
That's really not bad.
So look, I mean, you can hate on the Ridgeline, but it has done the same course all the other trucks have done, just not with the same amount of confidence.
Yeah, and you really can't overstate how nice it is on road. In the front of the Ford Ranger, we have a pretty substantial skid plate here, also independent front suspension, also coilover design. Tell me about the sway bars.
Well, Case, this vehicle does not have a unlocking front sway bar, and the Ranger Raptor doesn't either. Case, does this vehicle have a front locker?
This one does not, but the Ranger Raptor does.
Yeah, pretty cool. Now moving back, Case, talk to me about the transfer case.
Yeah, tucked up here is our transfer case on this truck. Like on every standard Ranger, it's going to be a part-time four-wheel drive, but if you also opt for the Ranger Raptor, you will get 4Auto.
Yep, and then further back, we do have a skid plate
Sorta.
on the fuel tank.
Yeah, it's plastic.
Well, a little wimpy. And then what about the rear end?
We've got a solid rear axle, leaf springs, and outboard shocks, and this truck does have a selectable rear locker. And for the frame, it's 6.5 inches tall and 3 inches wide.
All right, Case, in the Ranger, the all-new Ranger for this year.
Yeah,
see how the ride is.
The newest truck of the bunch.
Gosh.
I wouldn't call it the smoothest. It's probably comparable to the Colorado.
maybe a little worse because the tires are a little smaller.
Yeah, so we've got a 31.6 inch tire on this, pretty standard, and 9.3 inches of ground clearance.
Yep, that's right, Case. Now this is the 2.3 liter turbocharged engine. Actually the lowest horsepower here, right?
Yeah, 270 horsepower, 310 pound-feet of torque.
So good torque, yeah.
Definitely good torque. And later on, you will be able to get a 2.7 liter V6 that's going to be able to get you more power, more torque. But right now, this is the engine that's available.
All right, Case, 4 low. We're not engaging any special modes.
Nope, this is just doing it standard in 4 low.
Well, it's doing pretty good so far.
Yeah,
Articulation
like
feels okay.
Articulating well. Traction controls, figuring it out.
Yeah, but it's definitely taking its sweet time.
Yeah, it's got to think about it a little bit.
It's doing pretty good though.
Yeah.
Didn't have a lot of intervention in the normal mode from traction control. So this next run, we're gonna try it, of course, with rear locker and some of those bits, and I'm sure we're gonna see better performance there.
Yeah, and of course, it is worth mentioning that, like with the Chevy Colorado and the GMC Canyon, there is a more off-roady version of this truck available. Obviously, the Ranger Raptor,
Yep.
which has got totally different hardware, but this is really the hardware that you're gonna get on most Rangers.
I don't know, dude, this ride quality is pretty stiff. At least that, of course, we are at recommended pressure. If you were gonna off-road, you'd wanna drop that down a little. Our camera's actually sunken quite a bit. Let me pick that up. I do like, Case, that you can get this FX4 package across a huge number of trim levels, and it does provide you with an E-locking differential, which, even though I do like the G80, the E-locker is preferred. One thing I'm not a fan of, though, is they don't give you a physical button for the E-locker. You gotta go into the screen.
Yeah, which is a little strange, especially if something happened to your screen, then how are you gonna get to your locker?
Okay, so we're gonna go locker on, and we're also going to try the trail control, and we can use this set button here.
Yeah, and we've got a mud and ruts mode.
Yeah, engage that mud and ruts if you would, Case.
I gotta say, this is a pretty cheap feeling mode selector too.
Sand, mud and ruts.
ruts.
Okay, and then we've got our trail terrain. We're going to set it to 2 miles an hour. It's not.
I felt like it was gonna do it for a second.
It's keep trying to take me out of 4 low. I don't want to go into 4 low. Okay, well, rear locker is engaged.
Oh, is it?
I'm just driving with my foot.
You're doing it yourself.
I'm wondering if it doesn't like the mud and ruts in the trail control.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to want to do a combination of all.
Oh, there we go.
Off-road goodies.
You see that? Okay, so when we went back into normal mode, now we can use that trail control. So the vehicle's doing it all on its own right now.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting that it won't allow you to do this off-road thing in one of the off-road
mud
modes.
and rut setting. Yeah, but of course with the rear locker engaged, that's going to greatly increase the amount of traction out back, so we were able to walk up that.
Yeah. So it took a little bit of figuring out with the different systems. It's not the most intuitive setup that we've got here, but because of the selectable locker, once we got it set up, it was just as good as anything.
It's so funny. So in sand mode, won't let you do the trail control. Oh, now it's doing it in mud and ruts. That's good. Nope. This is the most cumbersome system. So the trail control system will only work in the normal mode. In all the other off-road modes, it tries to take you out of 4 low.
Really?
Yeah.
Which doesn't seem to make sense.
That does not seem to make sense. So like if I want to use a trail control, I can't be in the mud and ruts
so if
mode.
we go to mud and ruts.
And then it says to exit 4 low, shift to neutral, and it won't do it. See? It won't actuate the trail control.
But as soon as you go to like sport or eco or whatever.
Yeah, but
normal.
If I go to eco mode or normal,
then it starts doing it.
It starts doing it. Case.
That almost feels like a glitch.
Maybe it is a glitch. It might be an early production thing.
Yeah, it's not intuitive.
It is not. No, it doesn't make
it doesn't make
make a ton of sense.
So Andre, here in the front of the Gladiator, something pretty unique. This is the only truck in the mix with a solid front axle.
It is old school,
Yeah.
and very Jeep-like.
Yeah, and with this solid front axle, we have coil springs, and we have, because this is a Mojave, these fancy Fox shocks with remote reservoirs, and we've got hydraulic bump stops, don't we?
Yeah, if you look inside that spring in the front, there's a hydraulic bump stop up there. So this is fancy Mojave suspension, basically.
Hell yeah, and then moving back, we can see a decent amount of underbody protection. Didn't have much under the motor itself, but the motor is tucked up pretty high.
Yeah.
And then this transfer case.
Transfer case has full-time or part-time capabilities, so 4 auto or 4 high and 4 low, and it's protected by this cross members and this plate.
Yeah.
And then the fuel tank,
Yeah.
protected as well.
Yeah, same thing. And you know, this isn't the beefiest skid plate we've ever seen on a truck, but certainly better than a lot of the other trucks that we've been testing today. And then here in the rear, like all the rest of the trucks apart from the Ridgeline, we've got a solid rear axle. This does have a rear locker. You can get a Rubicon with also a front locker, but this Mojave doesn't have it.
Yes.
And then also coil springs in the rear here, piggyback Fox shocks that are mounted outside the frame rail. And then check out that badass multi-link setup.
Yeah, I mean, they've been using this on Ram trucks like 1500s, right? Some 2500s, and of course Gladiators, kind of similar geometry,
Yeah.
and it's really cool.
Yeah, and then we've also got a full-size spare back here, which is always nice to have, pretty accessible.
Yeah.
And we measured the frame rail. It's about 5.5 inches tall and about 3 inches wide. Now I've got our foremost expert, Andre, here, the truck guy himself.
Thank you.
And Andre, we've got some fancy Fox shocks here, so let's see how the comfort is going down the logs.
Yeah, and we also have solid axles front and rear.
Yeah, which is not necessarily
Whoa.
conducive to ride comfort. And
So I would say this is not the most comfortable
no,
I've been.
it's not the most comfortable, although the shocks themselves feel really good.
Yeah, well, you know what Mojave is really meant for, according to Jeep? It's like fast desert running, right?
Yeah.
So if you wanted a crawler, you would get a Rubicon, right?
Yeah, and really, if it were my money, I think the Rubicon would be the one that I would go for. But this Mojave is still very capable, and we're just in 4 low, none of the special modes. Let's see how we do up trenches. We should get really great articulation.
Yeah.
Because obviously solid axles, that's one of our favorite things about them.
And also, well, the slightly negative thing of the Jeep is that longer wheelbase.
That's true.
Ooh, I can hear the
little
traction
bit.
control system. So the longer wheelbase doesn't offer as good of a breakover angle,
Yeah,
but articulation
true.
is great.
but our angles are still pretty impressive. Now we're getting just a little bit of hesitation, and we are going slow up this as always to
Yeah.
try and make it as difficult as possible to see how the traction control system works, not using momentum. And it just takes a second of thinking, and that traction control gets you through.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like you spun tires too much.
No.
It controlled the tires.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, I'd say, a pretty good system there. And we do have to go down the logs again just to circle back around.
And by the way, we have front and rear cameras. We don't have the side view cameras,
Yeah.
which is a slight difference from some of the other trucks we've tested.
Yeah, and this Gladiator could be loaded with even more features that are available, but already this one is pretty pricey at
yeah.
$68,000.
This
What's
is by far the priciest of the comparison.
What's our tire size here?
33,
A 33.
which
so,
is also the biggest tire.
yeah, on the big end. And then do you know what our ground clearance is?
I think it's just over 11 inches.
Yeah.
So it's one of the greatest ground clearances of the bunch, the biggest tire of the bunch, the longest wheelbase of the bunch, and the most expensive.
Yeah, and then of course this venerable Pentastar. This is a motor that we're very familiar with, and I'm also going to go into
Rear locker?
Off-Road Plus here and switch on my rear locker, which switches on really easy. Press a button and 2 seconds later, it's activated. What's our horsepower and torque here?
So the engine is a 3.6 V6, 285 horsepower and 260 pound-feet of torque, but it's geared low. It's a 410 rear axle.
So it's not the most power, not the most torque of the bunch, and you do kind of have to wring it out a little bit to get that power out of it.
Yeah.
And it's what, an 8-speed?
Yep, 8-speed.
Yeah.
ZF.
So it's not a bad powertrain. Certainly feels a little more dated than some of the powertrains we've got in these other trucks that have been more recently updated, because this is one of the older trucks of the bunch. But from the off-roading, you wouldn't tell, because that was really good. With the rear locker kicked on, there wasn't the slightest hint of any hesitation.
No, and also almost no traction control system intervention.
Yeah.
And no slip.
If this were a Gladiator Rubicon, then we would have a front locker as well.
Yeah.
It'd be even easier.
So now we have to come to a verdict.
Yeah.
Let's step outside.
It sounded ominous.
So this off-road slip test is also part of the bigger picture, right?
Yeah.
We've done the iGauntlet, World's Toughest Towing Test.
True.
We've done MPG testing. We've done technology testing, where Nathan went through and showed us all of the tech in each truck. So this is a small piece of it. So now we have to come to a verdict.
And that's the tough part, because if you isolate it to just how these trucks performed on the slip test and here at the trenches, if it were me and my money, and we had a lot of really good performances today, but this Gladiator with its solid axles, with that rear locker and with the traction control programming, it's kind of hard to beat, specifically off-road.
But it was a little bit bumpy on the logs.
It's true.
So that's a small negative there. Also, this is a basically fully optioned Mojave X, which is a new model for 2024.
That's true.
And the price, $68,800. So you, Tommy and I had a meeting off camera, and you guys told me that the Tacoma was like ahead of all the other trucks, right?
Yeah.
I would say they're about equal, give and take, with the performance that the Jeep did.
Yeah.
But the Jeep is more expensive, and it has a little bit more protection and also, well, pretty nifty suspension.
Yeah, and that also brings up the interesting point that for the amount of money that this truck costs, you're getting into the amount of money that's going to get you also around the area of a Ranger Raptor or a TRD Pro Tacoma, or a Canyon AT4X or a ZR2 Colorado.
Or it's 68,000 plus, you're getting into the full-size territory.
Yeah,
so you can buy a pretty well-equipped full-size off-roader.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, there's a lot of really good contenders here, and it depends on what you're looking for, pros and cons with all of these trucks, but I'm kind of with you. I think price considered, the Tacoma TRD
might
Off-Road,
have a small edge here.
Tacoma TRD Off-Road might be the budget best option. But what I would love to see is this test again with all of the top dog off-road midsize
Oh, you mean
trucks.
like TRD Pro?
Yep.
ZR2 Bison?
Yep.
Raptor?
Raptor and a Rubicon.
You know what? That might be arranged.